to process passengers and baggage efficiently while still keeping prohibited items off airplanes. However, improvements still need to be made. Last year, a Government Accountability Office test of airport checkpoints found that explosive devices could be smuggled through undetected. There have also been recent news reports highlighting security failures, including a January 2008 CNN segment that featured a TSA employee slipping a bomb past screeners in a planned test. One of GAO's key recommendations for dealing with these shortcomings was to invest in improving security technologies. The Transportation Security Laboratory, or TSL, is at the forefront of developing the next generation of aviation security technology. This laboratory, which was transferred to DHS Science and Technology Directorate in FY 2006, serves as the nation's key resource for transportation security-related research, development, testing, and evaluation. In addition to groundbreaking research on explosives, TSL develops and validates passenger and luggage screening technologies, certifies devices developed by private industry, and provides technical support to TSA for deployed technologies. Rigorous testing and evaluation are an important step toward ensuring that new technologies meet TSA's technical needs. Currently, TSA works closely with the laboratory to develop test protocols and define criteria for success. But the security failures discovered by GAO and others illustrate the need to constantly update tests to ensure that technologies can deal with emerging threats. Technologies deployed before they are truly ready cement the perception that aviation security is nothing but theater. Finally, we often forget that a technology is only as successful as the person operating it, and this is especially true in the aviation security sector, where screeners must determine whether objects identified by screening technologies are truly dangerous. Additionally, passengers also play a key role in any technology's performance and success. If passengers find screening technologies too cumbersome or too intrusive, the consequences can ripple across the entire aviation sector. TSL and TSA must work together to ensure that human factors are taken into consideration from the first stages of technologic development. Dr. Hallowell has said in the past that she envisions a checkpoint in the future where no one has to empty their pockets, take off their shoes, or try to fit their toothpaste and deodorant into a tiny plastic bag in order to get on an airplane, and I, for one, truly look forward to that day. The committee applauds that goal, and I want to work with you all and the TSA to ensure that the next generation of aviation security technologies are effective and efficient while meeting the needs of all screeners and passengers. I'd now like to recognize my friend and colleague, the ranking member from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey, for his opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wu, and I want to apologize in advance to our distinguished panel because I'm going to have to step out after I make the opening statement, hopefully to come back because I don't want to miss all of this important, very, very important hearing from such a distinguished panel. Dr. Oxley, I see you're a professor of chemistry. I have a degree, a BS in chemistry from Georgia Tech from a long time ago. I hope if you're still doing any teaching that you grade a little easier than those monsters that I had at Georgia Tech. But in any regard, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this important hearing today on the Department of Homeland Security's Aviation Security Program. Aviation security is an issue that affects every member of Congress as passengers across the country put their faith in the Transportation Security Administration to have the technology in place to keep them safe as they travel. We have an excellent opportunity today to discuss how to best put the immense creative talent of our country's scientists and engineers to use to prevent acts of terrorism in our airports and skies. Aviation continues to be a target, no question about it, as evidenced by the publicized liquid explosive plot from 2006, and of course the attempted attack by the famous, infamous shoe bomber Richard Reed back in 2001. A successful attack like the tragic one that did occur on September the 11th, 2001, would yield an immediate and catastrophic loss of life, create economic losses throughout the aviation industry and possibly beyond. In fact, I think if that occurred today, it would be a lot more devastating economically than it was back in 2001, what with the price of jet fuel and the airlines struggling. But there is no easy, all-encompassing solution against a cunning and committed enemy. We must continually review, refine every defense and seek out new ideas and technologies that will better nullify the threats that will continue to be there. And we must also recall that this is but one challenge to implementing an effective, efficient, and evolving defense of our homeland. I'm eager to hear what the witnesses have to say about this challenge and how we can improve our current aviation security efforts. Mr. Chairman, we must also ensure that our substantial investments in R&D and new aviation security technologies work as advertised. They are coordinated throughout the government, include appropriate university researchers and private sector companies. And to that end, I'm particularly interested in hearing our TSA and Transportation Security Lab witnesses describe their relationship and what are the plans for the future. Formerly part of TSA, the Transportation Security Lab became part of the Science and Technology Directorate of the Department of Homeland Security back in 2006. The lab possesses many of the world's foremost experts on all kinds of aviation security technology and, of course, supports research, development, test, and evaluation activities based on the requirements and the priorities of TSA. Within the wider aviation security industry, some have had difficulty understanding the roles and the responsibilities of TSA and TSL and how other institutions like universities, national labs, or private companies can best contribute. I hope that our witnesses today will be able to clarify clearly and concisely, lay out who is developing our aviation security strategy and how that strategy is being implemented. How can a university researcher determine what TSA's most pressing basic research needs are? How can a private company translate broad equipment requirements to technical specs that can lead to a commercially available product? Is there a standard process for test and evaluation of new technologies? So answers to these questions will lessen confusion outside of the Department of Homeland Security, and it will allow TSA to create more successful partnerships. Again, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel, and with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Dr. Gingrey, and we look forward to your return once you have taken care of other very important tasks. If there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, the statements will be added at this point in the record. And now I am delighted to introduce our expert panel. Dr. Susan Hallowell is the Director of the Transportation Security Laboratory. Mr. Adam Tsao is the Chief of Staff of the Office of Operational Process and Technology, which handles technology procurement issues for the Transportation Security Administration. I actually had to read that phrase 3 times this morning so I wouldn't trip over it right now. Dr. Jimmie Oxley is a professor of chemistry at the University of Rhode Island and is the co-director of the newly awarded DHS University Center of Excellence for Explosives Detection. See, I should have read that more carefully. Explosives Detection, Mitigation, and Response. And finally, Dr. Colin Drury is a distinguished professor and chair of the Department of Industrial Engineering at the State University of New York at Buffalo. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony should be about 5 minutes long, after which members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. Please feel free to summarize your written testimony, and we shall begin with Dr. Hallowell.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wu, and distinguished members of the committee. It's an honor for me to appear before you today and provide information about the Transportation Security Laboratory, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate. The Transportation Security Laboratory has historically been responsible for turning aviation security applied research into prototypes and products. Following the Pan Am 103 tragedy in 1988, the Aviation Security Improvement Act was enacted by Congress. This law mandated the development of technology that could be certified to be reliable and detect explosive materials concealed in checked baggage. This resulted in the creation of the Aviation Security Laboratory, my lab, which at that time was an element of the Federal Aviation Administration in 1992. The ASL received direct funding from Congress for explosives detection, infrastructure protection, human factors, and aircraft hardening. Congress also required that the FAA develop a certification standard that would define the performance requirements for an explosive detection system, which we call EDS, in terms of probability detection, false alarm rates, throughput rates, and detection of specific types and configurations of different kinds of explosives. The EDS certification standard was established and published in the Federal Register in 1992, and the lab certified its first EDS unit in 1994. The ASL was integrated into the newly formed TSA after terrorist attacks on 9/11 and was renamed the Transportation Security Laboratory. The TSL provided the intensive, accelerated effort necessary to develop, mature, and certify technologies necessary to support the historic deployment of aviation security technology screening devices in American airports. During this time frame, new standards of performance were created for TSA, and several technologies were qualified or certified. In 2003, the TSA and the TSL joined the new Department of Homeland Security, and in 2006, the TSL became the Department's Science and Technology Directorate. In an ever-changing landscape of potential threats, the Transportation Security Lab continues to be recognized as the foremost resource for applied research development, integration, and validation of leading-edge science and technology for the detection and mitigation of explosives and conventional threats. The lab continues to work to provide both technical and procedural solutions that will work in the field. The TSL performs R&D at the request of the S&T Directorate. The laboratory currently supports S&T Explosives Division checked baggage, air cargo, checkpoint program efforts. The TSL also performs work for the TSA on an as-required basis. This includes certification, qualification test, and technology assessment testing. TSL is also the go-to laboratory for a number of other government agencies that are looking for explosive detection devices. Test and evaluation activities at the TSL encompass two independent functions. The independent test and evaluation function is responsible for evaluating mature technologies that may meet TSA security requirements that are suitable for piloting or deployment, and principally, this supports the TSA needs. The research, development, test, and evaluation function has responsibilities ranging from evaluation of applied research to prototype development and maturation, and supports S&T or other R&D customers that we have at the laboratory. These two groups set their priorities using different methodologies. The IT&E group has a strong relationship with TSA's Office of Security Technology in that they frequently discuss testing requirements, priorities, and the results of those testing evaluations. Results support TSA decisions for field trials, deployment, or their investment strategy. The IT&E office judges detection worthiness and product readiness. The customer of TSA sets the requirements, and the laboratory designs each test to determine if candidate systems meet those requirements. The types and frequencies of independent testing at the TSL has tripled in the last 2 years as acquisition by TSA has become more diverse and more explosives and weapons detection equipment has become commercially available for testing. In general, there's 3 kinds of tests administered by the independent test and evaluation team. The certification test is focused on providing laboratory certification of matured explosive detection equipment. Certification is recognized as a world standard for explosives detection. The qualification tests are designed to verify that a security system meets the requirements specified in a TSA-initiated technical requirements document. The results from this test, along with TSA-conducted pilots, field trials, generally result in a determination of fitness for use by TSA. Laboratory assessment testing is conducted to determine the general capability of a system. The results of these evaluations of candidate security systems drive future development efforts or operational evaluations. DT&E testing at the TSL assesses the strengths, weaknesses, and the vulnerabilities of technologies as they mature. The primary focus is to ensure that technology is robust and ready to go to the final stages of testing done by the independent test and evaluation group. While the TSL performs testing and certification of technologies, it's the responsibility of TSA as our customer.
Dr. Hallowell, if you wouldn't mind summing up.
Certainly, sir. In conclusion, I'd just like to say that the focus of R&D and test and evaluation is done by the TSL, and our focus is to develop and mature and transition technology to detection explosives. We have a close relationship with our customer, which is TSA, and it allows us to understand the customer needs. The TSL does stand proudly behind the fact that every piece of security equipment that is in American airports has gone through the hands of people in our laboratory. Chairman Wu and ranking member who left and distinguished members of the committee, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide this testimony.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hallowell. Mr. Tsao, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to be here today to appear on behalf of the Transportation Security Administration to discuss our research and development and testing needs and discuss how S&T supports our mission. If it pleases the committee, I'd like to request that my written testimony be submitted for the record. As you know, TSA operates at over 450 airports. We operate screening operations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across 6 time zones. On a daily basis, our 43,000 transportation security officers will see 2 million passengers or 1.8 million bags. And my job as the Chief of Staff for Operational Process and Technology is to make sure the technology we feel provides the men and women TSA the best opportunity in a very demanding environment against a determined foe. As Dr. Hallowell pointed out, in 2006, the Department of Homeland Security consolidated all research and development and testing functions of the component agencies within the DHS S&T Directorate. As such, TSA relies heavily on S&T to satisfy our basic, applied, and development research needs. At the same time, we maintain responsibility for operational testing and evaluation, operational integration, and deployment of new security technologies. We're also the ones that set the security strategy and that everybody works off of. We have a very strong relationship with each of the divisions of the S&T Directorate, but we have a particularly close affiliation with the Transportation Security Lab. Our histories go well back to when these activities were in the FAA. We depend heavily on, as Dr. Hallowell said, the Independent Test and Evaluation Group at TSL. I know all the professors there, I know all the doctors, I know all the projects that they're working on. We talk on a daily basis. We have a very open dialogue on the information we need as well as the ways they can help us. For each technology, we will identify the requirements that have to be met. Then the IT&E group will take those requirements, develop a test plan, test it, provide us the results. We'll take these thorough and unbiased results, and we will take them into consideration as we make our policy and investment decisions. I think there was also some questions about how we participate in the S&T capstone integrated product teams. Last year, I believe, was the very first year for this process, and we engaged at a very high level. Administrator Hawley himself co-chaired the first round of the explosives IPT with the director of the U.S. Secret Service, Mark Sullivan. The process has been extremely valuable to us. Through the process, I think we've been able to better articulate our operational needs, not just our technical needs, but our operational needs to the rest of the department. Also, it's given us a fuller understanding of the needs of the other operating components, and it's given us opportunities to enter partnerships that I don't think we would have otherwise considered. So, Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for the opportunity to highlight our progress in making aviation more secure, and I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tsao. Dr. Oxley, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Wu and Congressman Smith. I always like to talk to Smith since I'm married to one. The question I was asked, the three questions, and the third question I think Dr. Hallowell has answered admirably. So I'm going to start with the question about current state of research and explosives. And I gave, first of all, a very general answer because we do, all countries do, current research in explosives. We have a very minor effort in the U.S. The NRC report that was published in 2004 estimated we had 24 chemists working in energetic material, new chemical synthesis. Now, I'm talking about new military explosives. I'm not talking about counterterrorism type issues when I say that. We do work on formulating new devices to make our explosives safer to handle, more effective, and have longer or shorter lifetimes depending on what it is we're trying to accomplish. Device-centered research also occurs at the military labs. So we have work going on military labs and national labs. That's a general answer to a question of tell us about explosive research. Governments all over the world put restrictions on military explosives. Despite that fact, if you look at the table I gave you, you'll see that half of the explosive incidents have been with military explosives. In fact, not with commercial explosives, which may speak very well to the control that folks exert on commercial explosives. You asked me a question about liquid explosives. Since solid explosives perform equally well to liquid explosives, we usually prefer to handle solid explosives, less handling problems. There is not new research or very little in new liquid explosives. However, there is much old literature on liquid explosives, and what you see is terrorists pulling out that old literature and making use of things that are commercially available, like hydrogen peroxide or nitromethane. These are not surprise materials. They're just taking advantage of what is already known. We do need to have new research in detection across the board. The issues with detecting liquid explosives are related to, if our manufacturers detect what they're asked to detect. And they have said, we'd like to know ahead of time what we're going to be asked next. They can't afford to have instruments detecting a threat that hasn't been asked for because it raises the false alarm rate. So you go right where you're asked and do that type of detection. The issues with liquids are we don't want to open the bottles, so it's a sealed container issue, and we have all the same issues if we have a well-sealed solid to deal with. Detection issues must be addressed. Concerning the chemicals themselves, we need some basic research in detonation to see what commodity chemicals that we're not aware of could be detonable. We need basic research in that area. There was a famous chemist in the World War II time frame who said, give me enough peanut butter and I'll blow up the world. And we don't know if he's right or not about that one. In this country, we use 6.4 million metric tons of ammonium nitrate a year. Worldwide production is 39 million metric tons and 9 million metric tons transit. Urea is fourfold in terms of production and export of urea, and I've given you a table on those two issues. I consider those two the premier explosive precursors to take a look at, and indeed the House and the Senate have passed the Secure Ammonium Nitrate Law, and I believe that DHS is going to administer that. I think we need to look at a handful of explosive precursors for administrative control. That's very doable. We have been collecting this data since the 1980s, 30 years of data on who the end users are. We just haven't really worked at making that a useful policy in terms of interdicting and following what happens from the manufacturer to the end user of specific precursors. If I now move my 26 seconds to detection issues, across the board, we have issues on getting the sample to the detector. We need basic particle surface studies in that area. Those are primarily for the detectors that require a molecule of the explosive to get into the instrument. Our other detectors that rely on a signal an emission type technology, and those are bulk detectors and standoff detectors. They have to have an emission signal. We need lots of development, but we need some basic research into what is physically, scientifically possible to do. And my last point is that the manufacturers across the board, and they come into my lab and they say, help us out. We want to know what's happening next. And if you want to engage the wonderful research that universities can do and the vendors themselves can do, we need a little better flow of information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oxley. Dr. Drury, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to this hearing on such an important issue. I'm a human factors engineer from University of Buffalo, State University of New York. My research covers human performance in inspection systems, from manufacturing industry through civil aviation to detection of threats on people. I've worked with people on the front line, such as TSA screeners, and also been a member of committees on research in this field, such as the NRC's Committee on Assessment of Security Technologies. Human factors engineering uses data on the performance of humans, for example security screeners, in complex systems, such as aviation security, to design better systems that make best use of the unique capabilities of the human and the automated devices to reduce error and increase throughput. There are three aspects of aviation security, three measures that we've already heard about. These are important: missed threats, false alarms, and time taken to process each item. All of these translate into two overall measures: risk and delay. To integrate human factors engineering into the design of future technological systems, we can use successful design techniques from other areas. Design of military systems, civil aviation cockpits, chemical and nuclear facility control rooms have all been done. First step is to recognize that humans are going to be present in security systems. Traveling public is no more trusting of completely automated security systems than they are of unmanned airliner cockpits. The issue is not whether we can eliminate the human, but how best to use the human who is going to be there. An example is the inline checked baggage inspection system at many airports. It's based on 3D scanning of each bag. Automation is used to highlight those areas that contain a potential threat. This is a search function. The highlighted bag is shown to the human operator, who has to mark it for further inspection or pass it. This is a decision function. Humans are relatively quite reliable in decisions, whereas machines are much more reliable in search. So this is quite sensible. In general, automation is allowed to perform rapidly within strict rules, while humans provide the flexibility to respond when the rules don't apply. The next steps after this are to design specifically for the humans. The human interface with the technology, the training programs, the interface between people, for example, at a checkpoint. There are standard techniques in human factors that have been used in these other fields to do this. Currently, the TSA as professionals within the human factors engineering area with expertise at the Transportation Security Lab. None of these are currently listed as members of the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, but they have been working extensively with researchers and manufacturers on improvements to the interfaces, as well as on longer-term research studies, such as developing selection procedures for screeners and human problems in container security. They've also funded some more fundamental studies of human factors engineering and security. For example, I got a one-year grant from them at SUNY. Could more be done? Certainly. The last time I visited a manufacturer, which was a couple of years back, there was little evidence of using human factors engineering professional expertise in design of systems. Without early involvement of human factors engineering, the human in the system may not make the optimum decisions, resulting in increased risk and passenger delay. We can measure the effectiveness of human factors engineering, as we've been talking about, in security equipment, really in two ways. The first way is to evaluate whether the machine shows evidence of having human factors engineering used. The second way, and the preferred way, is to evaluate the performance of the whole system, the human plus the equipment. And if this is done correctly, with performance measures and observation measures, we can measure the errors and performance times to get a figure of merit for the system, but the observations provide the locus of any performance defects, so we can see perhaps why these things are happening. To sum up, overall there is really no downside to using human factors engineering in the design of security systems. Without it, predictable performance lapses can occur, leading to increased risk and passenger delays. The additional cost of incorporating human factors engineering early in the process has been found in aviation and military domains to be rather low. Thank you for your time.
At this point, we will open our first round of questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. It's not that we don't have better things to do, but we do fly a lot. We members of Congress do fly a lot, and we at times, well, we speculate about all sorts of things. And after September 11, one of the things we speculate about is if you were going to bring down an airplane, how would you do it? Top of the list for those of us in the Oregon delegation was a flammable liquid. That was in the fall of 2001 or the winter of 2002. And yet, my recollection is that restrictions on liquids or the focus on liquids didn't occur until much more recently. Now, you all are responsible for implementation and for research. We members of Congress are not scientists. We're not reputed to be very smart. But how come we were thinking about something that TSA didn't start looking for until much later? And was research being done in this field prior to the implementation of limitations on liquids on board airplanes? Dr. Hallowell, Mr. Tsao, would you care to handle that first?
Well, first off, I believe the FAA prohibits handling flammable liquids on aircraft, and I know this because they took a whole bunch of rum from me coming back from an island.
Well, I know the FAA prohibits that, but there was no method of, I mean, there was not an active search or prohibition. I mean, the prohibition might have been in place, but I believe until relatively recently, you could take a large bottle of something, whether it's rum or water, on board an airplane. And when did the ban go into place, where it was actually looked for by the TSA?
We actually implemented the ban on August 10th of 2006.
So that's a 4.5-year window.
Yes, sir.
From September 11 to the ban.
Yes, sir.
Did folks think that might be a threat?
We did look at, and some of that predated my time at the agency, but we did look at the various threats to civil aviation and the threats of, whenever we look at risk, we really look at 3 components of risk. 1, what is the threat stream? Is there an adversary interested in this? What is the adversary's ability to carry that out? 2, what is the consequence? What will happen if the adversary 2? And 3, what is the inherent vulnerability of the system? So I think when you start looking at those factors, the threat of a flammable liquid taking down an aircraft is relatively low compared to other threats at the time. During August of 2006, it was determined that there was a new threat using a liquid explosive, which was judged to be powerful enough to cause catastrophic damage.
Now, forgive me, Mr. Tsao, if I'm, imagining things that can't happen, but it was another member of our delegation, one much more senior, who's much more senior than I, and with substantial aviation experience. The methodology would just be to take a bottle of gasoline, run down the aisle, and have one person behind you ignite the stream, and that the consequences would be pretty dire.
Relative to the other threats we're facing, sir, we believe that is a lower threat.
Chairman, may I say something?
Please.
The difference between a deflagration, a burn, and a detonation is huge.
Yes.
And I think that is what Mr. Tsao is telling you, that relatively speaking, the detonation threat that came in late 2006, the summer of 2006, was
But if you have a burning
substantial.
cabin, I mean, that's a bit of a concern in an airplane, isn't it?
Certainly, and there's a whole group I've run into in I don't know if they're FAA or TSA that's looking at protecting aircraft from fire.
Well,
Yes, there's a-
the point of the question is not what has happened in the past. The point of the question is, are you properly identifying threats for the future?
We believe so. Again, sir, we take three parts of our methodology. What are the adversaries looking at? What are the inherent vulnerabilities to the system? And what are the potential consequences, initial, primary and secondary?
And I wanted to add that prior to the overt ban on liquids, our lab was already doing research because we'd been asked by a federal agency to do so. So this was not a surprise that these liquids were a possibility. It was just a prioritization. If everything is looked at once, you miss the high priority items.
Oh, I understand. At least among the Oregon delegation, the flammable liquid scenario was our number one, and we found it rather curious that that was not on other folks' lists. Dr. Oxley, what you had to say is the most comforting thing that I've heard thus far. I recognize the member from California for 5 minutes. Nebraska, my apologies. It's California without an ocean.
Well, I'll get back to you on that.
Well, California with a football team.
Needing a little extra work there. But thank you, Chairman Wu and witnesses. Again, I'm not an expert. You are. I guess if routine or repetition makes us experts, some of us could be in terms of airline security. I think, Dr. Drury, you might be best to respond to this, but how do you decide, what the threshold is for a discretionary decision as someone as a TSA worker is going through a checkpoint?
The rules are fairly clearly written by TSA and TSL, but the point about having the human in there is that they make fairly routine decisions pretty well. The better you can organize it so that they are doing what's called rule-based work, so they follow a set of rules, just as in landing an airliner. You have a set of rules, a rule-based decision system, but you have a pilot in there who can look for things that aren't covered by the rules, look for the unusual things. The person who found explosives coming over the border into Washington State, for example, customs agent, security agent there. This was a beautiful piece of a human following things that weren't directly part of the thing you have to do every time. So humans have two functions. One is to follow a set of rules where those rules apply, and they do that reasonably well. They don't do it perfectly, but neither do machines. And the other one is to bring their unique human capabilities into there, of reasoning it out. So it's not a rule-based decision, it's called knowledge-based decision, where you work things out from first principles. Yes, this looks suspicious, I will do this.
Right, so I don't expect a quick formula necessarily, but I'm curious as to how or what the approach is. Sometimes what would appear to be common sense to me doesn't appear to be common sense as I go through a checkpoint at an airport. And I'm just using my own anecdotal experience from repetition. But can you explain how perhaps they eliminate some of those decisions?
Many of them are rules they have to follow. For example, when they do a check on your ticket and so on. So there are strict rules they have to follow here. And at the checkpoint, they have got higher levels of authority they can pass things up to if needed. So they're not entirely on their own. But they are the first people who can trigger a response. So if they trigger a response, the system can move ahead. If they don't trigger a response, it doesn't. So in some ways, it's reasonably optimum for them to make some false alarms, to make sure that they have got, that they have covered the things that are unusual.
For example, and I hate to get hung up on details here, but a container that its ultimate capacity exceeded the restriction, but its obvious contents are far below the limits, and yet the whole line is stopped. The passenger is asked how exactly, or letting them know that it's going to go in the trash, or whatever the case is. I mean, to me, that could be avoided. Am I missing something?
No, I've had exactly the same thing, where I was carrying a small amount of liquid in a larger container, and they were following rules. Their first line of defense is to follow the rules. And if you look at the consequences for not following them, you can see why people might wish to follow them, because they could be checked up easily, and somebody could say, you or I could be a person going through testing them, saying, do they follow the rules? In this case, they wouldn't. Does it make sense in every occasion? I don't think so. But the question is, which error do you want to make? The error of potential inconvenience of passenger, as I was and presumably you were, is probably less than letting something through that could be construed as a threat.
Thank you. Mr. Tsao, if you wouldn't mind elaborating perhaps on how the rules are made, and also would someone with more seniority or more authority be able to just automatically pass over something such as that? Maybe if you could speak to uniformity as well.
Certainly. I think one of the real difficulties for our screening workforce is, again, the number of people you see in any given day. 2 million passengers a day going through various different types, coming with very different travel patterns, whatever they're coming through. It is difficult for us to train for every single opportunity or every single exception that may occur. And so giving the screeners leeway, which we are leaning towards, is very difficult to train. We are moving towards a system where instead of being a rules-based system, you focus more on your interaction with the passenger. But again, that's very complicated for us to initiate, and we're just starting that. But it really comes down to volume. If you may have 2 ounces of water in a 16-ounce bottle, and we let you through, but does that mean the next 400 people in line do the same thing? So it becomes a process where you've got to draw the line somewhere, and then unfortunately the next time you'll know, don't come with a bottle with only 2 ounces. It's the only way we can keep the lines moving. It's the only way we can have a consistency of product.
And so you would argue then that actually you end up doing it faster, and I'll accept that. I mean that does.
In the long run, yes, sir. Again, if you have too many exceptions, every time you've got to call over a supervisor to answer certain things, is it worthwhile for the traveling public? Is it worthwhile on a security basis to start making exceptions to every possible scenario that can go through?
Is it conceivable that the smaller the number of passengers through a checkpoint in a given day, the stricter the scenarios seem to be?
Again, sir, the screeners and the screening supervisors are instructed to follow a set of standard operating procedures.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from Nebraska and recognize the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my colleague there from Nebraska, and being a graduate of both UCLA and USC, I'd say they neither have the coast football or a basketball team. They need a little help coming from the west side. We're going to get a gingerly game going here. I still got the floor. I got 3 questions, and if you could be as brief as possible, because they're going to call votes in a moment. Dr. Holloway, in your written testimony, you note that funding for aviation security R&D for explosives detection has not increased in real dollars since 1996. What budget would you have requested, why, and how would you use it?
Yes, ma'am. I think I would have been inclined to ask for budgets that were very similar to what we received in 2004, 2005 timeframe, in that there's some still daunting R&D issues that we really haven't attacked properly. And here I'm thinking screening of cargo, which certainly is looming on the horizon, and a few other technological breakthroughs that we need to pursue to have some technology enablers to look at other things such as checkpoints that are more user-friendly and more integrated and faster as well.
Could you supply this committee in the future that information?
Yes, ma'am. I'll take that for the record.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, what's the status of the frequent traveler program? I heard a little bit about it 6 months to a year ago, where if people who fly on a regular basis, they would get a certain kind of ID card, and it was being used, piloted at a few of the locations. What's the status of implementing that program?
Yes, ma'am. I believe you're referring to the Registered Traveler Program.
Yes.
That program is basically, it's a private sector program. It's run by a coalition of private sector interests in which we interact with. I am not the expert on that program. I can tell you it is out of the pilot stage, and it is being broadly used at some of the airports. We have been asked to evaluate some of the technology that they have used, but I'm really not qualified to answer any of the programmatic questions.
Okay, could you supply this committee with the information
ma'am.
of who's doing the program and
Yes,
how the
ma'am.
results are? And then my third and final question, which I think is to you, Mr. Tsao. How many TSA employees would you say a percentage are non-U.S. born? And how do you recruit?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to get back to you on both of those questions, ma'am. I don't know specifically any of the statistics.
I realize that the Oklahoma City bombing that occurred was a domestic issue. One of the things I oftentimes get in the airports is people who notice how many people are not U.S. born who are working as TSA employees. And so I'm just curious what the percentage is and what you do to recruit for everyone. So I look forward to that information as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hit my deadline and enough time for the gentleman from Nebraska to tease me a bit.
We will do a quick round. Those bells, horns, whistles, etc. you hear in the background are calling us to votes, and it'll be a lengthy series of votes. So it is my intention to permit all members who wish to do so to ask one further round of questions and then to adjourn the hearing. And I have only one question, and this is for the entire panel. And this is about research priorities. My understanding is that the TSL priorities are set by DHS S&T Directorate, which is supposed to look to its customer components, specifically the TSA. How do you integrate research priorities from other sources, such as the Homeland Security Science and Technology Advisory Committee and industry stakeholders, and also since IPT's focus on short-term technology development priorities, how do you determine priorities for long-term and more basic research? And I look forward to commentary from folks outside of TSL and TSA also.
Yes, sir. I think right now the research priorities are being driven by the capstone integrated product teams the Undersecretary Colin has set up. He has a number of capstone integrated product teams. Certainly the one governing explosive detection is chaired by Administrator Holly and also has other sitting members as well. The purpose of that capstone team is to identify gaps that need to be addressed in terms of what the customer needs. It's the roles and responsibilities of the Science and Technology Directorate to turn those gaps into an idea of what kind of research, enabling research needs to be conducted to start identifying the R&D needs. So the prioritization is made within S&T. The capstone process has just really initiated this year, and I believe it's been fairly successful. The point is, integrated product team is not just a two-year initiative. This is actually driving R&D that goes out far into the future. Adam, would you like to comment as well?
Yes, sir. I think the community is really starting to come together, and quite honestly, it has been sparked by Admiral Cohen's institution of IPTs. Last year was the very first year for that, and I think we've learned a lot about who we are and who has the expertise within DHS and with outside of DHS, and that community is coming together through this process.
Drs. Oxley or Drury, would either of you care to comment on the setting of priorities and the balance between short-term and long-term research?
I certainly hope that that's something we will accomplish in setting up our new center, which has been announced but not officially awarded yet. It's something we're having constant discussion on and reaching out to the entire community of folks, not just the university people, so that we are in touch with that. I think to counteract terrorist bombings and IEDs, it's going to take a multi-prong approach. It's not simply detection. It's pre-bomb making and it's post-bomb making. So it's hardening. And all of those issues are addressed at various places, and we hope to pull them together.
Purely from a human factors engineering point of view, there has been considerable work done, but focused largely on the screening process. I think there are a lot of other areas where this work needs doing on a more developmental short-term basis. But I think there's a lot more work needs doing on a long-term basis of how people make decisions under stress effectively and how you can support them in doing that.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tsao, if you wouldn't mind, how does TSA determine aviation security strategy and equipment requirements? Do you consult with the technical expertise at TSL in order to do so? And furthermore, how does science and technology adjust its R&D efforts to reflect the equipment requirements from TSA?
Thank you, sir. We absolutely discuss. We have a very open dialogue with TSL. Again, we set the requirements. We know what the threat streams are. We know what the vulnerabilities are. We know what our screeners need. We're understanding our passengers, I think, better than we have in the past. So it is incumbent on us to set the tone on where research and development, both short-term and long-term, need to go. As far as how we determine the technologies, often something will come through the door. Looks promising. TSL, will you look at us, does it do what it say it's going to do? They'll test it. Yes, it does what it says it's going to do. Okay, we'll look at it. If it can do what it says it can do, how can we use it? All right, now this is how we're going to use it. Will using it in this manner meet our operational needs? They will go back and look and say, yes, in this manner it will detect with a certain probability of detection a certain false alarm. We'll go back. Then we may, based on that laboratory results, we may start a pilot, and it may turn out that in the airport environment, this brand new widget cannot handle the volume of people we need to put through it. Or in some cases, there are a lot of very promising technologies where the timetables are just too long. I mean, we really need to average any process we have can't really go beyond 15, 20 seconds. Otherwise, you start significantly jamming up our checkpoints, and which causes additional security problems. So there are things that may be useful, but they need to get themselves engineered to the point where they meet our operations. If all that occurs and we find something that meets our detection needs, meets our operational needs, we know it's not going to break down. We know that the screeners are going to be able to use it. We deploy that stuff fairly quickly. I think one example you might see, the work we've done with the lab, was the procurement of the Fido Pax Point. This was a piece of equipment that was really in Iraq looking for bombs. We were able to modify it to look for the emerging homemade explosive threat. Did that, made a procurement, had it on the street in less than 6 months. So, I mean, we're really trying to be more, I should say, adaptive as the threats come in.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Hallowell, in your testimony, you state that the Independent Test and Evaluation Group and Research and Development Group, quote, set their priorities using different methodologies, unquote. How do you see these methodologies varying, and how do their priorities compare with those laid out by TSA?
Well, there's two different teams of people in my laboratory. The Independent Test and Evaluation team really does the kinds of tests and evaluations that directly support activities planned by TSA for piloting or deployment. So that particular team works very, very closely with Mr. Tsao and his group to determine their priorities. And this happens every day. Priorities will change based upon what their interests are and what the threat level is and intel and things like that. So far, we've been actually able to test almost everything I believe you've asked us to do and get it done on a fairly timely basis. The other team, the R&D team, actually is doing different things for a living. They're looking at technology at various technology readiness levels. So it could be like a breadboard or a prototype. And those things typically come out of R&D land, although we do have a pretty active program where we work directly with industry under cooperative research and development agreements to help mature technology. So if you work for a company and you think you have a solution that can find a bomb, what I say to you is please bring it to my laboratory and let's shake it down. And the way we shake it down is, of course, we have every flavor explosive, and we can evaluate it, understanding well what our customer needs are, so we can advise companies as to how to grow their technology to get closer to the requirements of the customer. So that's more of an R&D kind of look, see, how are you doing, what can you do, what can you not do, and where are the opportunities for improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, the gentlelady from California.
Yes, Mr. Tsao, in your testimony, you say that talking about these standards and you turning around products, in your testimony, you say that TSA develops and identifies the requirements that must be met for procurement to proceed. We've heard from aviation security industry stakeholders, however, that testing new technologies sometimes suffers because new and emerging technologies are tested against old standards of performance. What is TSA doing to update those standards in light of new technologies, and what support does TSL provide to this process? And finally, how do you engage the private sector when setting performance standards for these newer technologies?
Yes, ma'am. I guess it all goes to what our current capabilities are and what the needs are. If we're talking about a new technology competing with the old technology, that new technology has to do at least what that old technology does. So there's very little we can do about, or we'd be interested in doing, in degrading those standards. However, if there are situations, again, where our capabilities are not where they're supposed to be, and we see new technology, we're very flexible in the sense that it gives us something. It gives us a chance. If you have something that gives us a chance, I'm not going to hold it to a standard that is not reachable in the short term. That's just doesn't make any sense from a risk standpoint. Now, we'd expect that over time, you'd be able to get to, develop and, again, provide more capabilities. But we are in a very adaptive world, and I need to be as adaptive as possible.
Yes, ma'am, and I'd just like to add to that often TSA does come to us, and they're interested in the technology, and they ask us, what is the art of the possible? Right now, we're involved in doing a market survey and also just evaluating technology for a product line that the CTO is very interested in. So we do an evaluation of what's available and advise them so they have a heads up. It's a little bit more than just detection, but we do look at emergent technology to help TSA.
I thank the gentlelady, and before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank all of our witnesses for testifying before the committee today. The record will remain open for additional statements from members and for answers to any follow-up questions that members of the committee staff may ask of the witnesses. I thank you all for making the journey, for your presence today, and despite whatever our discussions have been through this process, I actually feel better about going to the airport the next time I'll be going. Thank you very much for being here today. The hearing is adjourned.